This weekend there was the summer party of the Generation Identity, and they wanted to combine this with a protest march in the city center of Halle. This protest march was stopped in its tracks by counter-protesters. They even managed to stop the different groups of Generation Identity. There were about 200 people from coming together. One who was stranded at the train station was Martin Sellner, the husband of Brittany Pettibone. So what I want to talk about today is how it is possible that authorities can stop any protest that is registered, how it is possible that in a democracy all protests must be registered, and see how counter-protesters can be allowed to stop the original protest, because that's not obvious. But first, I wanted to talk about what actually happened at that very day. Maybe the most noteworthy events are that a car was burned down that belonged to one member of the Generation Identity, supposed to come from Berlin. That is not a confirmed piece of information, but the media outlet Mitteldeutsche Zeitung suggests that it is the car of one of Generation Identity's members that came in from the city of Berlin. Then there were some shuffles with the police, of course, not by the Generation Identity, but of course the counter-protesters. They believe still that they are the anti-state, anti-government people, when in reality they are just hitting the foot soldiers who can absolutely do nothing about politics and so on, in lieu of those who are responsible for politics and who on most counts actually agree with these people. So these leftist counter protesters went right there and hit and shoved away policemen. And the third occurrence was that a smoke grenade was thrown. For almost a minute there was smoke to be seen, and it seemed that there was something very smoky thrown there. It was nothing that really burned, apparently. The word they used in the newspaper was Rauchtopf, which is something I've never heard before. It seems to be a smoke grenade by all pictures that I could find. What I find interesting about this is the propaganda speak here. Antifa has managed to use very folksy, down-to-earth vocabulary for military stuff. So a smoke grenade would ring a bell with everybody, but they make things sound like it was something from the kitchen also. But a smoke... the word Rauchtopf, smoke pot, really isn't like a pot at all. It looks more like a torch or something. It's something that's just emanating a lot of smoke. So that's what we saw. The city seemed to have organized a festival designed to stop the Generation Identity from pursuing with their protest, and it was already called Citizen Festival of Democracy, Bürgerfest der Demokratie. And whenever you hear the word democracy in Germany, that is usually something against conservatives. It never has something to do with democracy over the Western system at all. And in this case, they were just, they used this word bunt, which means colorful or garish, to speak of multiculturalism and so on. And so the entire slogans had something to do with colorful and bunt and rainbow. And this had nothing to do with democracy. That was designed to speak against Generation Identity, who happens to be against mass immigration. Not against all immigration. Obviously, Martin Sellner is married to Brittany Pettibone, who is not a European and not a citizen of Austria. On this Citizen Fest of Democracy, Sven Liebisch, a member of Generation Identity, climbed on one of the cars to give a speech. That was quite a disturbance, I would say. You see here on this picture how there is a big loudspeaker, and I can imagine that this is a disturbing thing to do, and of course not under every circumstances you are allowed to put up a big loudspeaker and to just say whatever you want to say. Plus, I can imagine that this festival was in a place that was not strictly registered for the protest of Generation Identity. So the police removed him, and I can imagine that this is within all, valid norms, all norms of decency that we can all agree on. But what is interesting is that while he was removed, there was a second place where they had loudspeakers on just a few meters away. There was an entire group that went with the slogan "Best away the Nazis," and with best they were meaning loudspeakers that were drumming away loud music so that people can hardly speak and can hardly understand what anybody else is likely to say. And this was not removed. And the police even guaranteed to these people that they are allowed to stay there and have their basses on. The bass, the drumming, the being louder than the others is an integral part of their protest, and being disruptive and disturbing everybody and harassment is an integral part of how the counter-protest actually went forward. I'm not saying that Sven Liebe's behavior is okay, but I'm saying that there are again two standards at play for two separate people. This is basically a major point that I want to get across, namely that we have already reached this point of no return, where we do not speak anymore, and where the left can't even fathom the very idea of letting other people speak. A counter-protest is supposed to give the arguments that speak for your side, while the other side that has registered their position first and their roots and so on first may give their views on their side of the city. So people can listen to your side and they can listen to their side, and everybody gets heard. This is the original idea. But with the police allowing counter-protesters to sit-ins, to man-chain off a street segment so you can't pass by, and to stop you from speaking with loudspeakers. In that very moment, the only option for people is to resort to violence at some point, sooner or later. At this point, the escalation is still moderate, even though this week we have seen another murder. There was one guy from Eritrea who was shot by a passing car, and the shooter was apparently a conservative terrorist. I have spoken in my last video how the left is portraying the entire conservative movement internationally, Trump included, Orban, everybody, Boris Johnson, as potential terrorists, or terrorists mainly, and people who just have some parliamentarian arm, terror organizations with political arm. The reality is, of course, the other way around, and cases like these hardly exist still. But it becomes ever more difficult to control the nutcases if speech is prohibited. To begin with, the only reason why I am going online and speaking about the things I do is because these things, that protests are even stopped in their tracks, make me believe that it is not just an internet problem. It's not just a problem with Google. It is not just a problem about how we radicalize on the internet, so is often said about Muslims to shut down our speech. In fact, what I see is that all speech gets smothered, and it is even more difficult to speak offline than online. So online is the only resort we have to actually come together and to speak still. If it were not for all these limits, I would not even be online. I would not be online for these matters. Before 2015, I did not have one single social media account. Not one single social media account. I was not interested in cats videos. I was not interested in music videos and so on, what people usually watch on social media. I only went on social media when I recognized that nowhere else people were allowed to speak anymore. And I mean, I'm computer savvy. I know how to get around a lot of things and to accustom myself with different technologies and stuff, and I'm very quick to learn. But I understand that many people do not have these options. And the more this window closes of speech, the more people will resort to violence, and the harder it becomes to control these nutcases. And in this case, the man who shot this Eritrean went on to shoot himself. So he was so desperate about the state of affairs. And he had no outlet. He probably did not speak a different language. I have no idea. There's little information about him, but it's most likely that he did not have the same options that I have to even speak. And this is what radicalizes people. Not speech leads to violence, silence leads to violence. And speech diplomacy is usually the stuff that ends violence. It has always been throughout the history of mankind. And even this case, this murder case, is represented falsely in our media right now. We have the allegation that the Eritrean was only shot for the color of his skin. I very strongly doubt that this is the case. I mean, it would be comfortable for conservatives if that was just some fetish like Jack the Ripper going after prostitutes, or some other weirdo going after only, blonde women, or some, murderers have proclivities, If that was the case, if we really just kill this Eritrean for the color of his skin, that would be great for conservatives, but quite frankly, that is not the truth. He's most likely a political murderer who shared some idea or some target with our targets. And we have to take that responsibility and tell off conservatives to do so. They are harming the cause. And this is not how we can resolve the issues. The left is not even able to portray that murder correctly, even though, and that's quite surprising, in reality would be more difficult for us to swallow and to deal with than the lie. And still the left prefers to tell a lie, namely that this guy was probably just about some skin color fetish. So the entire endeavor to put a protest on the street took hours and hours and hours and was ultimately unsuccessful. This says a lot about the state of our democracy. And I asked myself, how much do we actually grant authorities? The police ordered the march not to go forward, and kept the members of the Generation Identity apart. Some stayed in the train station, some in the house that they own. And the police told them to stay where they are and not to move. And I just wonder, how much authority do we actually grant the state? Of course, I suggest that when you register such a protest march, you should stick to the laws. You should keep the laws as well as possible. But more philosophically, I just wonder if you want to prevent tyranny, how can you allow the state to decide if you walk and if not, and how much warning do you give? I mean, is it okay that you have to register every single protest march? I do understand that, of course, if you impede traffic, if you impede the public in any meaningful manner, then you cannot walk wherever you want. If a protest march goes through the middle of the road and stops all the cars from passing by, then of course you cannot do this. But imagine you're just a small group picketing or something. You should be able to do that in public places like parks, like squares, sidewalks. Picketing should be able on sidewalks, quite frankly, if there's enough space for passers-by and so on. So I wonder from what number of people on you would suggest that picketing should be registered with the government that you want to criticize? How much do you allow the government to tell you that you should not be there and say what you want to say? And how much warning do you want to give them that you plan to do some messaging to the public, right? When there are crazy people registering marches, as the city authorities are usually looking into the nitty-gritty of the application to stop them from going forward. And I see that as very worrying, even though I'm the most anti-neo-Nazi person ever. I mean, obviously. But it is worrying from a standpoint of the preservation of our democracy. If the city halls are allowed to pick and choose, what application passes through and where they are looking for the little hairs in the soup just to stop people from speaking, and you are in trouble. So I would suggest that sidewalks, parks, and so on should not need registration at all, usually, and that protest marches should in general go forward, and that a counter demonstration should never be let close to the original demonstration, meaning when the counter protest march registers, and they are disturbing the public, no doubt. They are making the sit-ins and chaining up the streets and so on. They are out there to disturb some other citizens. So if two parties register protests, they most certainly should not register them in the very same place, and this should be done before that. And I'm speaking about this in so much detail because this last Saturday is not a situation. We have it since I can remember, that counter protests have stopped original protests, and always the media is on the side of the counter protesters and never says a word. It is not. It is completely normalized that people do not actually come to speak. It is normalized that when people try to speak, that there is always some noise, and this is celebrated. The media celebrates it when people do not come to speak. And we have come used to it. And I'm talking about this general suggestion of whether some protests should not need registration, and if registration is done, it should be kept away from the places where counter protests register. I'm saying this because there should be a standard which we would normalize in future, because the normal state today is not allowing everybody the same rights and is not allowing free speech. So that was it for today, and I'll see you soon. Bye.